Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced from alexmercedcore.com with video number 3 in this coverage of Masonite 4. So in this one I just want to go over little things like how to access like URL params in a URL, things like that. So for example, let's head over to our routes. So again, our routes are in this folder, routes in web.py. Okay, web.py. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to alter this first page. Actually, what I'll do is I'll just make it another route, but make it use the same controller function. So I'll just do comma, paste, route.get. And again, that if you wanted to do any other verb, it would just be like route.get, route.post, route.put, route.delete, etc. But let's say I wanted to do this. Okay. So if I do this, what this means is that this part of the URL is a URL param. So if you ever use like Express, you've probably seen it like as a colon. If you've used like either like Fast API or Flask, you've probably seen it done like this or like this. You know, different frameworks do it differently. But in Masonite, we would just do this. Okay, so this just means that this is a URL param. Okay, so basically what happens is that in order for me to access that param, there's two ways for me to access it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my controller, first page controller, that we created in the previous, but these are the HTML files. Okay. And we're going to head over to the pages controller. And actually what I will do is I will create a second function. And we'll call this first page 2. Okay, so then web.py, this route will go to first page 2. Run to the same template, but okay. So now I would like to get that part of the URL. I want to get that data. What I can do is I can create another argument here that has the same name, username. Okay, and now what I can do is now I have access to it, so I can now pass that over to the dictionary here. So I can say username colon username, because it's going to notice that that URL param is defined in the route, and if it sees that, it's going to store it in this variable, and then I can use it in the function. Okay, and then what I'm going to do is change the actual template and just say if, let's see here. Let's just say num username. Okay, so let's try that out. So now if I go over here, now if I, instead of just slash first page, I say slash first page slash cheese. See, now I see cheese there because it's taking this part of the URL. So let's go back to my route. So it's taking this part of the URL and treating that as username. So this gets stored inside username, which I then receive. Okay, this could be literally anything. So I could be like bread, and now it generates a page with bread instead of cheese. So that can be a really useful way to get, like, again, a particular user, or if you're looking for a particular post, if you're doing like a single post page, you don't want to create like an actual page for every post of someone's blog, right? So you can like pass in the ID and then grab the blog post with that right ID and go from there. So there's also different ways you can use that. It's pretty useful. But that's not the only way we can retrieve it. So one way we could retrieve it is like this, where we define an argument and receive it. We could also bring in the request object. Okay, so I can be like from masonite.request import request. Oh, I typed import wrong. Import request. Okay. And I could, just kind of like we did with view here, where we just do view colon view, I could do like request colon request. Okay, and then basically I get this request object, pass it on this variable request. But notice, like, now I'm typing in this view over and over again, request over and over and over again. So what we can do is we can take advantage that Python classes, or really in any language, they have what's called a constructor. So in Python, that's called the init method. So I can say def init. Okay, and just say self, and then define the other two arguments. So I can just say, hey, let me grab the request, Control X, paste that in here. So that way I receive it in this method that'll run when the class is instantiated, and then I can assign it to self. So I can be like self.view equals view, self.request equals request, and now I have access to the view via self. So I don't need this argument anymore. So I can just do this. See, now that's kind of trim things down a little bit and just do self.view.render, because now the view function is built into self. So by doing this pattern, again, I keep a lot of this stuff a little bit simpler. So now instead of using username here, okay, what we can do, let me just go to that section of the documentation. That's going to be inside controllers. I see I can get request.param. Okay, so that's the other way I could do it. So instead here, what I would do is I would do self.request.param. And then I can be like, I want to get the param that's called username. And this would achieve the same result. So again, I'm passing to my template a value we're going to call username for the purposes of the template, and the value of that property is going to be the result of this, getting the username param. Okay, and then again, you got to use self.view.render. Okay, because again, we changed that to just be self. But the nice thing about this, again, is like it just keeps the code cleaner. I'm not having to write view, request over and over again. I just do it once with the constructor, and that trickles over to the rest. So now if I do this again, it still works the same way. So I can just just say vegetables, vegetable, and it works. But overall, I've cleaned up my code a bit. And again, I don't have to be passing in all these additional arguments. Okay, so I can keep my method simple. Cool. I can also grab URL queries in a similar way. Okay, so I think it's just gonna be like, it's either in params or it's in its own query thing. I always forget off the top of my head. I think it's going to be in a separate, different the request part. Here we go, request. Because this will tell you, this section shows you all the things that are inside this request object. So we now know that in this request object, there's param, but what else is in there? Like I can access cookies. So if I want to go access like a cookie that exists, headers, if I want to access like a header, like let's say you're doing like a authorization and you need to access like a authorization header. I can get the URL path. It's all here in the documentation, so I definitely highly recommend reading the documentation. Input would be for post request. That'll be discussed when we get more deeper into using some of these things. Route param, so we just did that. User, that's if you're doing authentication. Okay, then you get into query. So let's try this out. That's one way we can find that out. Let's just do this. Beauty of IDE is if I do self.request dot, I can see all the members. And I'm pretty sure there should be something called query, if I remember correct. Q, params, input bag. Maybe not. Maybe there isn't a query. So in that case, I'm going to assume that I'm going to receive that through. I'm going to receive the params from a specified route capture from the URL. So I'm assuming that would probably be in params as well. So let's test that out. Okay. So I'm going to add a URL query. And again, a URL query is everything after the question mark in a URL. So I would add a question mark at the end of the URL, and then I can have a key. We'll say cheese equals Gouda. So this would be the key, and then this is the value of that query. And I can add additional queries by being like, and hello equals world. Okay. So that's another key which equals another value. So let's see if I can access it. Okay. So we'll say query self.request.params. Okay, and then I'm going to try to access I think you said param before. param, and then I want to access cheese. Okay, and let's see if that works. So now, if I hit enter on this, it does not work. So that is not how I access a URL query. Okay, so in that case, let's do this. Query, URL query. I'm sure it's somewhere in the docs. Okay. Now parse into query notifications. Nice. Interesting. Let's see if it's in part of the input by chance. No. I think we could also, there's always this option. I could always just make an argument, call it cheese. Then I think it'll just take a query. If it sees a query by that name, it should take it. At least I imagine that would work. Oh wait, and we never use it in the template. Again, we use username here. So that's probably why we're not seeing it. So let's try that again. Cheese, but it's not, did I call it cheese? No, it's called query. Query, try that again. Yep, that works. Okay, so again, I could use this, again, define a argument that has the same name as the query, and then that'll work. But let me try again the params, because I had it all labeled wrong before. Self dot request dot param, and let's just try cheese and see if that works. That doesn't work. Let's try input. Okay, input works. Okay, so basically any URL queries will be included in the input, through the input, along with any like form data or data passed in as like a JSON body. So body data, query data, looks like it's all under input, and then any URL params are under param. Okay, so that's how you'd access URL queries and params. And let's just see if there's anything else I'd like to mention about the request object while we're on it. Input, route params, yeah, okay, that's those are the basics. But again, read the documentation on this section. So now you can actually start grabbing stuff from like the URL to feed into, and eventually again we're going to get to the whole part where we start using the database and things like that, but just want to kind of get this part across first. But now with that, I will see you guys in the next video. Have a great day and enjoy. Again, recommend create a project, play around with these things, get used to just like generating a controller, creating the actions, creating the routes, pointing those actions to render a view, and playing with Jinja and rendering templates, passing data to those templates. You really want to kind of get really comfortable with those basics as before we start getting more and more complicated. And just try to create like a basic, like, you know, whether it's like your own like resume page or portfolio page. Try creating something like that and just see how that goes first. So I'll see you guys later on. Have a great day and enjoy.